Пришлось однажды общаться с одним китаеведом. Речь зашла о той теме, которую нынче часто муссируют в медиа и на кухнях. Китайская угроза России. Китаевед пожал плечами, говорит, нет никакой китайской угрозы. Почему, спрашиваю. А вспомните, говорит, события Второй мировой. Маленькая фашистская Япония самым чудовищным образом издевается над Китаем. Фактически это геноцид. Количество жертв исчисляется в миллионах. Китайцы бессильны перед Японией. Русские тем временем сражались на Западном фронте. Они, наконец, вошли в Берлин и вспомнили, что остались проблемы на Востоке. И русские атаковали японскую армию. Японию, повторяю, которая казалась китайцам абсолютом зла. Русские истратили на этот абсолют несколько дней, и все. Нет никаких японцев. Китай свободен. С тех пор, сказал мне китаевед, у жителей Поднебесной в подсознании заложено навсегда. Русские – это такие ангелы или демоны, неважно, для которых нет преград. Русское зло способно убить любое другое зло, разодрать его в клочья и, шмыгнув носом, уйти, не ожидая благодарности, по каким-то своим мрачным русским делам.
And now, let's start from the beginning. I guess there's no need to remind the Chinese about it, but we, ourselves, should remember that at the beginning of the 20th century, we lost the war to the Japanese. Then, Russia signed over its leasehold rights to Kwantung Peninsula, including the cities of Port Arthur and Dalian, as well as the southern branch of the Chinese Eastern Railway. After finding out that there had been the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, the Japanese wasted no time and occupied the Far East and a part of Siberia. But this time it didn't go as well as it did during the Russo-Japanese War, and in 1920, the Japanese left Chita, which was de facto under their control, in 1922, Vladivostok, and in 1925, North Sakhalin. But of course, the process of pushing them out was slow and difficult. However, the intervention failure didn't sober up the land of the rising sun. Japan continued making plans for a vast expansion into the Russian territory. The idea was to establish the so-called Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere there. Here's what the professor of history from the University of Tokyo, Yabe Taiji, wrote about its borders. Greater East Asia Co-Prosperity Sphere, a vast autonomous zone for ensuring Japan's security and providing it with all necessary physical resources, should include North Sakhalin and the Kuril Islands in the north, eastern Siberia, Manchuria, inner and outer Mongolia, China and Tibet in the west, Dutch East Indies, Indonesia in the south, and the ocean all the way up to the Hawaiian Islands in the east. Japan envisioned itself as a vast empire. From the Prime Minister of Japan, Tanaka Gichi's memorandum to the Emperor Hirohito, July 25, 1927, in order to conquer the world, first we need to conquer China. The advance of our country into the region of northern Manchuria in the near future will lead to the imminent conflict with Red Russia. These plans weren't put on a shelf, and by the beginning of 1932, Japan had captured Manchuria, which was formerly a part of China. There, they created a puppet state, Manchukuo, headed by the last Chinese emperor, Puyi. In January 1932, the Japanese invaded Shanghai. Then, in March 1933, Rehe province was captured and incorporated into Manchukuo. And in May 1936, the pro-Japanese government of Inner Mongolia was established on a part of Rehe province and Chahar province's territories. The Chinese government, headed by Chiang Kai-shek, kept making concessions to Japan, leaving one territory after the other. Chiang Kai-shek had almost 3 million soldiers against 400,000 Japanese ones. On July 7, 1937, Japan started the war to conquer the whole China. Already on August 4th, Beijing fell, and then on November 12th, Shanghai. Chinese troops were almost completely destroyed. Realizing that after occupying China, the Japanese might invade the Far East again, the Soviet Union decided to help Chiang Kai-shek. Shortly after the onset of hostilities, China received Soviet weapons. And starting from October 1937, Soviet pilots and aircraft technicians started arriving. According to the head of the People's Republic of China, Xi Jinping, about 5,000 Soviet citizens, including military advisors and other specialists, fought against Japan on their side. Even according to underreported Japanese data, the Soviet pilots destroyed about 200 planes. Our own losses in aerial battles were more than 200 people. The attacks of the Soviet bombers on rear airfields on the island of Taiwan on February 23, 1938, and in Hankow on October 3, 1939, were particularly impressive. During the former, they destroyed or damaged 40 Japanese planes, and during the latter, 50, according to Japanese data. Naturally, in parallel to the events in China, the situation on the Soviet-Japanese border kept escalating. During the first 7 months of 1935, there were 24 instances of enemy planes invading the Soviet airspace in the border area, 33 incidents of shelling of our territory, and 44 incidents related to Manchurian ships violating the river border on the Amur River. In 1938, it came down to major confrontations. On the morning of July 29th, a Japanese unit captured Biezimiane Hill near the Lake Hassan, but by the evening it was retaken again. On July 31st, the new offensive by the Japanese began. 2 reinforcement regiments of the 19th Infantry Division captured Biezimiane, as well as Zaozirny and Pulemyotny Hills, and started reinforcing them. It was not possible to retake the territory with the available forces, and so by August 6th, the 32nd and the 40th Rifle Divisions and the 2nd Mechanized Brigade, supported by artillery and aviation, concentrated there. By August 12th, all the hills were retaken, and the Japanese retreated. The conflict at the Halhin Gol ended up being even bigger. 2 Japanese regiments with tanks attacked the 36th Division at the eastern bank of the Halhin Gol, and 3 other regiments crossed to the western bank, captured the Bain Sagan Hill, which was dominating the area, and started advancing into our rear. However, at that time, the Soviet troops were led by soon-to-be Marshal Zhukov, who, without any hesitation, sent the only available units, the approaching 11th Tank Brigade and the 7th Armored Vehicles Brigade, against the Japanese. Right off the bat, the attack caused heavy losses in military equipment. However, military historians admit that if it weren't for this bold maneuver, the Japanese would have been able to defeat our artillery, and our losses would have been even higher. The counterattack of Soviet tanks stopped the Japanese infantry. Meanwhile, our artillery arrived, and the Japanese assault was smothered. On August 20th, Soviet Mongolian troops went on the offensive and defeated the invaders, pushing them back over the border. As a matter of fact, these victories of the Soviet army were the main reason why Japan was so blatantly afraid to attack the Soviet Union and didn't do it at the same time as Germany. In April 1941, the USSR and Japan signed the Neutrality Pact. However, already on June 24, 1941, after Germany's attack on the USSR, Japan adopted the Program for National Policy of the Empire in response to the changing situation. In it, the Army was instructed to secretly finalize the preparations for the war against the Soviet Union in case the German-Soviet conflict developed in a direction favorable for the Empire. The Empire, as you understand, was how the Japanese used to call themselves. By resorting to armed force, the Empire will solve the northern issue and secure the stable situation in this region. They considered us the northern issue, but they did not yet realize the whole scale of this issue. Tokyo pinned most of its hopes on their European allies, Germany and Italy, with whom they signed the first Anti-Comintern Pact and then the Tripartite Pact.
Мы одерживаем успехи, но в той великой войне, которую мы ведем, нам необходимо захватить важные стратегические пункты в Азии, поставить под контроль природные ресурсы на Востоке. Мы должны усилить наш военный потенциал и успешно развивать сотрудничество с Германией и Италией.
For the sake of secrecy, the plan of the attack on the USSR was called Kwantung Army Special Maneuvers, or Kantokuen. They planned to launch an offensive in case the Germans captured Moscow. Besides 700,000 soldiers of Kwantung Army, they also placed under arms a part of Japanese troops in Korea, the troops of the vassal states of Manchuria and Inner Mongolia, and a brigade of Russian white émigrés. All in all, the Japanese armed forces could have involved up to 1 million people in the operation. The Japanese also planned to use bacterial warfare against the USSR and our allies. In order to do this, the Land of the Rising Sun created the so-called Unit 731. The first and foremost reason for its creation was the idea that captured the whole Japan, the idea of attacking the Soviet Union. And in order to invade the territory of such a strong opponent, they needed a new and effective weapon. In 1941, they dropped fleas infected with plague on the Chinese and spread other bacteria in their pure form, infecting reservoirs, wells, and rivers. Mitomo Kazuo, a member of Unit 100, wrote, "The experiments on living people took place in August 1944. The idea was to give experimental subjects sleeping pills and poisons without their knowledge. For the purpose of secrecy, all experimental subjects were killed. One Russian died after he was injected with 1/10 of a gram of potassium cyanide by order of the research officer Matsui. It's much better to practice and hone our skills, not on dead bodies, but on living people. When a person is alive, you can learn things faster because everything is the same as in real life. There's bleeding." Our autopsy room had a very special atmosphere. Everyone was smiling at each other as if nothing was going on. We were told, "We're all working for Japan's victory in the war. We must improve our skills so that our country can win." As for why many members of this unit escaped punishment, Professor Yoshiaki Yoshimi explained it this way. In a certain sense, those were invaluable materials because those experiments were carried out not on animals, but on people. And of course, America needed those studies because they believed that in the future, they would be able to use them for the war against their main enemy, the Soviet Union. It is known that the USA elaborated those materials with great benefit for themselves and used them, in particular, in the war against North Korea. It was also probably the reason why the USA strongly opposed including the issue of Japan developing and using bacterial warfare into the Tokyo Trials agenda. But that was later, after Japan had lost. After Japan invaded the Pacific territories of the United States and Great Britain, Roosevelt and Churchill immediately tried to involve the USSR into this conflict. At the end of December 1941, British Minister of Foreign Affairs Anthony Eden appealed to Stalin, asking him to allow American bombers to have a base in Primoria, but his request was politely declined. At that time, the war in the Far East was not beneficial for us, especially since our democratic allies did not even consider establishing a second front, but were already demanding our help in fighting against Japan. Strange people. Only when military actions in Europe came to an end, Stalin decided to attack Japan. From the materials of the Yalta Conference on February 11, 1945, the leaders of the three great powers, the Soviet Union, the United States of America, and Great Britain, agreed that 2 or 3 months after the capitulation of Germany and the end of the war in Europe, the Soviet Union will enter the war against Japan on the side of the Allies, upon condition, now pay attention, of the restoration of Russia's rights, which were violated by Japan's treacherous attack in 1904, the return of the southern part of the Sakhalin Island and all adjacent islands, and the transfer of the Kuril Islands to the Soviet Union. When our neoliberal crowd so strongly pushes for returning the Kuril Islands to Japan, they purposefully forget that the Kuril Islands belong to Russia by the decision of the global hubs of democracy, the USA and Great Britain.
Советское правительство заявило 8 августа, что считает себя в состоянии войны с Японией с 9 августа. Посол Советского Союза в Японии, товарищ Малик, направляется к министру иностранных дел Тога для вручения ему заявления советского правительства.
The accusations of the USSR treacherously attacking Japan are also baseless. 4 months before the start of military actions, on April 5, 1945, the USSR officially announced the denunciation of the Neutrality Pact. The statement said, "The Neutrality Pact between the Soviet Union and Japan was concluded on April 13, 1941, that is, before the attack of Germany on the USSR and before the outbreak of war between Japan on the one hand and England and the United States on the other." Since that time, the situation has been basically altered. Germany has attacked the USSR, and Japan, an ally of Germany, is aiding the latter in its war against the USSR. Furthermore, Japan is waging a war with the USA and England, which are allies of the Soviet Union. In those circumstances, the Neutrality Pact between Japan and the USSR has lost its sense, and the prolongation of that pact has become impossible. The Soviets started preparing for military action in the East as early as in spring 1945. A large part of trains with soldiers coming back from the German front were sent straight to the Far East. In August, the military alignment of armed forces in the region had more than 1,700,000 people, 29,835 weapons and mortars, 5,250 tanks and self-propelled weapons, and 5,171 planes. Marshal Alexander Vasilevsky was appointed commander-in-chief. It was opposed by the Kwantung Army under the command of General Otozo Yamada. The Soviet troops faced the challenge of defeating the opponent and liberating Manchuria and the northern part of Korea. The main idea of Vasilevsky's plan was the 6th Guards Tank Army passing to the central Manchurian plain through the greater Hingan Range, which, before that, was considered impassable for armored vehicles. Hero of the Soviet Union and writer Vladimir Karpov wrote, "By the evening of August 10th, the main forces of the 5th Guards Tank and 9th Guards Mechanized Corps of the 6th Tank Army entered the foothill of the greater Hingan Ridge in columns." The ascension of the main forces of the 5th Guards Tank and 9th Guards Mechanized Corps to the ridge began at the dawn of August 11th. The titanic battle of the soldiers against the mountain ridges of the Greater Hingan lasted for 3 days. The tank soldiers made their way higher and higher for 300 kilometers until they finally reached the pass. But the descent was as hard and dangerous as the ascent. The main forces of the 5th Guards Tank and 9th Guards Mechanized Corps overcame the mountain ridge and entered the central Manchurian plain near Lubei. By that time, the break-off of the main forces of the tank army from the rest of the front was more than 300 kilometers. The sudden and quick capture of the passes on the Greater Hingan Ridge, which was considered impassable for large military units and modern military equipment, denied the Japanese command the opportunity to use this important strategic border to organize strong defense in the mountains, and ensured the rapid invasion of the main forces of Trans-Baikal Front into the central area of Manchuria. This placed the main group of the Kwantung Army in a critical situation. The Prime Minister of Japan, Kantaro Suzuki, stated on August 9th, "The Soviet Union entering the war makes continuing the war impossible." Next day, Emperor Hirohito agreed with him. On August 14th, the General Staff Office of the Japanese Army declared the nation's surrender, and the act itself was signed by the commander of the Kwantung Army only on August 19th. On September 2nd, 1945, Stalin appealed to the people.
Товарищи, соотечественники и соотечественницы, но поражение русских войск в 1904 году в период русско-японской войны оставило в сознании народа тяжелые воспоминания. Оно легло на нашу страну черным пятном. Наш народ верил и ждал, что наступит день, когда Япония будет разбита и пятно будет ликвидировано. 40 лет ждали мы, люди старого поколения, этого дня. И вот этот день наступил. Сегодня Япония признала себя побежденной и подписала акт безоговорочной капитуляции. Это означает, что Южный Сахалин и Курильские острова отойдут к Советскому Союзу. Наш советский народ не жалел сил и труда во имя победы. Мы пережили тяжелые годы, но теперь каждый из нас может сказать: мы победили.
Just as a reminder, the war started on August 9th, and on August 19th, the Japanese General Staff Office surrendered. 10 days. It took only 10 days. Yes, we were capable of doing this. By 1945, the Red Army's combat effectiveness was incredible. The country had millions of military professionals with incredible experience of conducting war in any climatic and geographical conditions, crossing water barriers, retreating, advancing, appearing out of nowhere. The only thing we had no experience with was fighting on the moon. But even that, we could have mastered in a matter of hours. Everyone who should remember, remembers it. The most important thing is for us not to forget about it ourselves.